For 19 winters, Rowena lived on the frozen stone floor of an abandoned tower, locked away by the man who sired her. The Silverpine Pack believed she was dead, a scentless wolf hidden like a plague so her golden sister could shine as the rightful heir. They let her waste away in darkness. But when Alpha King Kailan, the most savage warlord the realm had ever feared, brought his army thundering to their gates and demanded a bride, her father's careful lie began to split at the seams. Eldrick intended to hand over his prized daughter. He had no idea the ruthless king would kneel only before the scentless prisoner rotting in his attic. Deep in the northern reaches of the Oakhaven Kingdom, where winters showed no mercy and the pine forests grew so dense they devoured every trace of daylight, Blackwood Keep loomed against the sky. Dark stone, brutal lines, a fortress that looked carved from cruelty itself, seat of the Silverpine Pack. For generations, Silverpine wolves carried a reputation forged in iron pride and raw, unrelenting strength. They were bound to the old laws, the pull of the moon, the rhythms of nature, and above all else, the sacred authority of scent. Among wolves, scent was identity. It carried bloodline, emotion, power. Truth. To lack one was to be something unholy. Rowena entered this world in total silence. When the Luna Beatrice delivered her firstborn on a moonless night, the midwives stumbled backward. The infant made no sound. Worse, she carried no scent at all. Nothing. Like cold water running over bare stone. And when the child's eyes finally opened, they were not the gold or amber of Silverpine blood. They burned violet, sharp, unnatural, wrong. Alpha Alderic, a man whose vanity rivaled his ambition, felt terror sink its teeth into him. The pack elders murmured of ancient curses. A hallowed one, they called her. A vessel sent by dark spirits of the old world to destroy the pack from within. Their verdict was swift. Leave the child in the frozen woods. That was the brutal, ancient custom for the cursed. But Elderic, driven by some thin thread of mercy, or perhaps a darker instinct of ownership, could not kill what shared his blood. So he built a lie instead. The pack was told their firstborn had died in the night. A small empty casket burned on a pyre. The wolves mourned. And while they grieved a fiction, Rowena was carried up the spiraling stone steps of the eastern tower, a crumbling wing of the keep sealed off for over a century. One room, one barred window, a life reduced to absolute isolation. 19 years crawled past. Rowena grew from a trembling, silent child into a striking, solitary woman. Those violet eyes held a sharp, quiet intelligence, the kind forged only by watching the world from the outside, never touching it. Her days were spent buried in ancient texts, delivered by Liana, a deaf and mute servant, the single living soul permitted to cross her threshold. Rowena understood the histories of the werewolf kingdoms more deeply than the scholars who'd penned them. Yet she had never once felt grass beneath her bare feet. Below her tower, life carried on without her. Beatrice, her mother, died of a shattered heart not long after Rowena's birth. Elderic remarried quickly and sired a second daughter, Geneviève, the golden child, the replacement, the living proof that the shameful secret locked above could be forgotten. Geneviève was everything Rowena was denied the chance to be. Loud, radiant, drenched in the sweet scent of honeysuckle and fierce alpha blood. Hair like molten gold, ember eyes that pulled the gaze of every unmated male across the territory. From her high, barred window, Rowena watched Geneviève sprint through the courtyards, spar with warriors, entertain suitors. She felt no envy, only a deep, hollow ache that had no name. She was a ghost haunting the edges of her own existence, a spectator, biologically forbidden from the world turning beneath her. But the fragile quiet of Blackwood Keep was fracturing. Far to the south, The Iron Fang court had swollen into a power unlike anything the realm had witnessed. Alpha King Kalen, the Black Wolf of the Valleys, had spent 5 relentless years crushing the scattered territories of Oakhaven beneath his heel. Kalen did not ask, he took. Pack after pack crumbled before his armies. Their alphas knelt or lost their heads. Now word reached Blackwood that his vast forces were marching north. They hadn't come to raise these lands, they'd come to claim them. King Kylan's decree was simple and absolute. The northern packs could keep their territories, if they knelt. If they paid crushing tribute in iron and timber, and if they surrendered a political hostage as collateral for their obedience. For Alpha Alderic, a hostage reeked of defeat. But a bride was strategy. A bride could plant his blood on the high throne of the United Kingdom. He chose Genevieve without hesitation. When the banners of the Iron Fang court crested the horizon, black cloth stamped with a silver jawbone, Blackwood Keep descended into chaos. Servants scrambled, guards straightened, and Rowena sat alone on the frozen stone floor of her tower, her bruised cheek pressed to the iron bars, watching the enormous host crawl closer. Even at this distance, the raw dominance pouring from the king's vanguard set the air humming. Static prickled against her skin. She couldn't have known, not then, that the cage Elderic had built to bury his shame was about to shatter. The courtyard of Blackwood Keep buckled beneath the Iron Fang vanguard. Direwolves twice the mass of Elderic's best fighters stalked near the gates, restless, coiled. Pine and leather and sweat saturated the air, threaded through with something heavier, something suffocating. Pure dominance. Alpha King Kalen rode at the head of the column. He swung down from his warhorse with a lethal fluidity that had no business belonging to a man his size. Dark armor encased him like a second skin, etched with runes from the old tongue. His face was hard, scarred along the jaw from some ancient battle, and his eyes burned cold. Pale grey, the color of river ice before it cracks. His presence hit like a physical weight. Several Silverpine guards bared their throats without meaning to. Elderic waited at the base of the keep stairs. Branwick flanked him on one side. Genevieve stood on the other, golden, gleaming, dressed to conquer. Alpha King Kalan, Eldric's voice carried over the wind, loud and practiced, though his spine curved just slightly. Involuntary. Kalan's pale gaze cut across Elderic, then settled on Genevieve. She wore crimson silk, elaborate and impractical, trembling faintly against the cold. Her chin was lifted, trying for regal. Kylan's nostrils flared. Ambition. Vanity. And beneath all of it, heavy perfume. Sickly sweet, layered thick to smother her true scent. His voice came low, rough, like stone dragged across stone. Elderic's reply was silk over steel, one hand sweeping toward the great hall. But surely, terms of alliance are better forged over meat and mead. Warmth breeds loyalty. Cold breeds only resentment. Cedric stepped forward, towering, red-haired, his hand already resting on his broadsword's hilt. Kylan raised one hand. Cedric stopped. Kylan's gaze didn't waver from Elderic. The banquet that night was desperation dressed in silk. Hundreds of tallow candles blazed across the great hall. Whole roasted boars glistened on platters, venison swimming in wine, mountains of winter root vegetables. Musicians played fast and loud, frantic melodies designed to drown the tension that clung to every corner of the room. Kylan sat at the head table. He barely touched his food. His expression gave nothing. Genevieve had been placed beside him. She poured his wine, leaned close. Her scent rolled off her in waves, desperate, cloyingly sweet. She practically hummed with a need to be noticed. Her voice dropped to a purr. One finger traced the rim of her goblet. Kylan set those grey eyes on her. Inside him, his wolf, ancient, feral, savage, lay completely still. No pull, no spark, not even a flicker of the bond's hum. Nothing. Her perfume was starting to throb behind his temples. A king requires loyalty. His voice was frost. His gaze moved past her, scanning the crowded hall. Refinement is a mask weak men wear to hide dull teeth. Genevieve's smile cracked, held, then turned brittle at the edges. Aldrich caught the stumble instantly. His hand flicked beneath the table, a sharp gesture, and the bards struck louder chords, filling the silence before it could spread. Far above the feast, sealed in the freezing blackness of the eastern tower, Rowena paced. Bass drums from the great hall hammered through the stone beneath her feet, sending vibrations up through her bones. 19 years she had accepted this existence, the good ghost, the quiet nothing. Tonight felt wrong. The air crackled with a strange weight, electric, dense, pulling her downward like the earth itself was calling. Liana, her mute servant, had gone hours earlier to help in the kitchens. In her rush, perhaps rattled by the overwhelming presence of the Iron Fang wolves, she had failed to drive the heavy deadbolt fully home on the outside of Rowena's door. Rowena stopped mid-pace, her eyes locked on the thick oak. She crossed the room, pressed her palms flat against the wood, and pushed. Nothing. She braced harder, throwing every ounce of her starved frame into it. A rusted metallic scream split the silence of the corridor like a crack of thunder. The bolt slid free. The door groaned open an inch, revealing the pitch-black spiral staircase beyond. Rowena's breath caught in her throat. Freedom. Raw and terrifying. If Aldrich found her, he would kill her without hesitation. He would call her an intruder, a witch. He would execute her where she stood to protect his lie in front of the king. But the drums below had found her pulse. They beat together now, one rhythm. She looked down at herself. Undyed wool, no shoes, no weapon. But the shadows had always been hers. 11, she told herself, stepping into the frozen corridor. Her bare feet made no sound on the ice-slick stone as she descended the spiral steps. She navigated by memory, ancient blueprints she had memorized in her cage, servant corridors, abandoned cellars. She avoided every main passage. She moved like something that did not exist. The Iron Fang guards, stationed at every intersection, never turned their heads. She slipped behind tapestries within arm's reach of trained killers, and not one flinched. She carried no scent. To a werewolf, danger announced itself through smell before sound. Rowena announced nothing at all. At last she found a heavy wooden door opening onto the western gardens, a forgotten courtyard choked with dead briar roses and brittle winter ivy. She pushed through into the biting dark. Night air struck her face like a blade, crisp, stinging, alive. Rowena collapsed to her knees in the frost-covered grass. Her fingers clawed into frozen soil, and silent tears streaked her hollow cheeks at the sheer, overwhelming reality of earth beneath her hands. Above her, stars blazed across the sky, no iron bars between them and her eyes. For the first time in her existence, she felt real. But she was not alone. The banquet had become unbearable for Kylan. Eldric's political theatre, Genevieve's cloying, desperate scent, the suffocating heat of too many bodies packed into stone walls. His nerves were raw. He needed cold. He needed silence. He left Cedric to watch the hall and slipped through a side door, following the corridors until he found the abandoned western garden. The raw mountain wind hit him like mercy. He leaned against a crumbling stone statue, closed his eyes, and exhaled long and slow. The conquest was nearly finished. Oak Haven belonged to him now. The victory tasted like ash. 28 years old, an alpha king with no queen. He had never found his mate. Without a true Luna, an alpha's rule remained fractured at its core. His aggression unbalanced, his pack incomplete. Genevieve was not even a consideration. He would sooner bind himself to a common foot soldier than chain his fate to that hollow ambition. Then, a sound. Kaelin's eyes snapped open. Fabric brushing against dead leaves. Soft. Almost nothing. He dropped into a fighting stance instantly. Claws lengthened. His eyes blazed silver, lethal and bright. He drew a sharp breath through his nose, opening every sense to track the intruder. Nothing. He inhaled deeper, chest expanding wide. Still nothing. No sweat, no adrenaline, no metallic bite of fear, no wolf musk. Not even the ordinary smell of a human body. Only frost. Only dead roses. But he could hear breathing. Shallow, erratic, unsteady. An assassin. That was the only explanation. Old-world sorcery, a masking spell designed to erase a killer's presence entirely. Every muscle in Kaelin's body coiled tight as wound steel. He traced the breath to its source, behind a dense wall of wild briar, thick and overgrown. Kaelin exploded forward. He ripped through the thorny barrier, massive hands driving straight for the hidden throat. He crushed the small, brittle figure against the keep's stone wall. One enormous hand locked around a slender neck, hauling the intruder clean off the ground. __quote_13_____. The snarl tore from him, inhuman, demonic. The figure thrashed, clawing at his forearm. Kaelin squeezed harder, stepping from shadow into moonlight to see the face of his would-be assassin. His lungs seized. A woman. Pale as bone under the silver light, draped in a filthy, undyed woolen shift. Her feet, bare, torn, bleeding from the briars. But her frailty wasn't what stopped the Alpha King cold. Her eyes, wide, terrified, staring down at him from where he held her pinned. The color of crushed amethysts, violet, burning with a wild, desperate glow. And then something impossible tore through him. Kaelin's inner wolf, that savage, blood-gorged beast that had butchered hundreds, that knelt before nothing, that held an entire kingdom in the grip of primal fear, released a broken, whimpering cry inside his skull. It threw itself against the walls of his consciousness, not in fury, in absolute, devastating submission. Mate. The word split his mind like an axe through timber. Impossible. The mate bond answered to scent, a chemical lock, a spiritual key. This woman carried no scent at all. She was hollow air, a void. Yet the instant their gazes collided, a shock wave detonated through his nervous system. A tether of molten iron, forged in a single heartbeat between his chest and hers. Kaelin released her. Rowena crumpled onto the frozen grass, choking, hands flying to her bruised throat. She dragged herself backward through the dirt, spine pressed to the earth, heart slamming against her ribs like a caged bird. She looked up at the giant towering above her. His eyes had cooled to stormy grey, but they were wide, fractured with shock, confusion, and something darker, possessive, hungry. Kaelin whispered, moving one slow step closer. He couldn't detect her scent. It broke every law written into his blood. Yet his wolf was screaming, demanding he fall to his knees and bare his throat to this barefoot, shaking girl. "Please," Rowena rasped. Her voice came out shredded, wrecked by years of silence and the crushing force of his grip. "Don't kill me. I only wanted to see the sky." Kaelin went still. That voice crawled down his spine like a blade. He lowered himself, folding his massive frame until he crouched at her level. One hand reached for her, trembling, a weakness he had never once permitted another soul to witness. His fingers caught her chin, tilting her face into the moonlight. "You are of Blackwood," he said quietly. The aristocratic sharpness of her cheekbones, the silver-blonde hair spilling wild across her shoulders. "But you carry no scent, and your eyes are violet." Rowena pressed her lids shut, bracing for the strike, for the revulsion. "I am cursed. Please, just let me go back to the tower. Alderic will kill me if he learns I escaped." Alderic. Kaelin's thoughts detonated. Old rumors surfaced, whispers buried nearly 2 decades deep. The firstborn daughter of Alderic and Beatrice, born dead, a dark omen, quote, 21, Kaelin murmured. His thumb drifted across her pulse point, that frantic, desperate drumbeat beneath her skin, the most intoxicating rhythm he had ever known. Rowena breathed, a single tear carved down her cheek, quote, 24, A deep, possessive growl rolled through Kaelin's chest. Understanding struck him like a battering ram. Alderic, the Alpha of Blackwood, had locked Kaelin's true mate in a cage. 19 years. He had buried the queen inside a tower because he was too blind, too ignorant to comprehend what she was. Rowena flinched at the growl, but no blow came. Instead, Kaelin slid his arms beneath her knees and behind her back, lifting her against his chest as though she weighed nothing. Rowena broke, thrashing against his armored body. Kaelin declared. His voice rang with absolute, terrifying authority. The shock bled away. What replaced it was something colder, a fury so quiet it could split bone. Every drop of it aimed at the Alpha of Blackwood. Kaelin drew Rowena closer, pressing his face into her hair. She carried no scent, but she felt like the entire world. Quote, 27, His voice was low, almost reverent. Rowena's voice broke with terror as Kaelan turned from the shadows and drove straight toward the heavy wooden doors leading back into the keep. "I am claiming my kingdom," Kaelan said. His eyes blazed silver again. "And I am claiming my queen." He didn't smuggle her back to her tower. He didn't conceal her in his chambers. Alpha King Kaelan drove his boot through the heavy oak doors of the western wing and stormed down the main corridor, carrying the barefoot, shaking, cursed secret of Blackwood Keep, straight toward the Great Hall. Ready to reduce Alderic's empire to cinders. The Great Hall of Blackwood Keep was a cathedral of indulgence. Raucous laughter crashed against the stone walls. Goblets rang like bells. Lutes shrieked under frantic fingers. Genevieve sat poised in calculated elegance, one hand resting dangerously close to the empty chair Kaelin had abandoned. Her laugh was a sculpted porcelain thing. Then the iron-banded doors at the far end detonated inward. The crack split the air like thunder. Oak slammed stone so hard, a tapestry ripped free and crumpled to the floor in a heap of dust and thread. Music? Gone. Laughter strangled in every throat. Hundreds of glowing eyes locked on the entrance. Alpha King Kaelin entered the hall. He did not walk. He devoured the room with each stride. His alpha aura crashed outward like a wave of black water, so dense, so suffocating that lesser wolves buckled. Knees hit stone, whimpers escaped clenched jaws. Instinct screaming one word: submit. But it was not the king's devastating presence that made Alpha Alderic's golden goblet slip from his fingers. Wine the colour of arterial blood spilled across the high table in a slow, damning river. It was what Kaelan carried. Cradled against his dark, rune-etched armour, a gaunt, barefoot woman in a threadbare, undyed shift. Silver-blonde hair spilled over his arm like moonlight on dark iron. She was trembling visibly, her face buried against his chest, hiding from the savage brightness of 100 candles and the hunger of 100 predators watching her all at once. Genevieve rose from her seat. Crimson silk whispered in the dead silence. __quote _32 __. Her voice wavered, her nose twitched, searching for the scent of the woman in his arms. She found nothing. Alderic's face collapsed, every shade of warmth drained from his skin, leaving something grey and hollow behind. His chest heaved. Raw, naked panic seized him by the throat. 19 years of lies. 19 years of meticulous deception. All of it cradled against the chest of the most lethal man on the continent. Gods! Alderic's voice erupted. Cracked, desperate, shredded at the edges. His fingers stabbed toward Kaelan, trembling. __quote _35 __. A dozen Silverpine warriors unsheathed their blades. They stepped forward on unsteady legs, caught between obedience to their alpha and the suicidal reality of approaching the black wolf of the valleys. They never made it a second step. Cedric's roar tore through the hall, so deep it shook soot loose from the rafters. 50 Ironfang soldiers drew broadswords in perfect, synchronized motion. Steel sang against leather. The sound filled the hall with a single, unmistakable promise: annihilation. Cedric planted himself between the Silverpine guards and his king. Golden eyes burned with killing focus. "Sheath your steel," he said. Low, lethal, final. "Or I will feed you your own hearts. Personally." The Silverpine warriors turned to stone. Eyes started back to Elderic. Desperate, lost. Kaelan paid the drawn weapons no attention at all. His gaze stayed fixed on Elderic as he marched down the center aisle, every step deliberate, until he stood at the foot of the high table. He lowered Rowena to her feet with impossible gentleness, but his arm stayed locked around her waist, massive, unyielding, pulling her tight against his side. Rowena kept her eyes nailed to the floor. The roar of the room, the crushing weight of roasted meat, sweat, fear, aggression, all of it pressing down on a woman who had spent 2 decades sealed inside absolute silence. The world tilted beneath her. She grabbed hold of the only solid thing left, the furnace heat of the king's body, immovable as iron. __quote _38 __. Kaelan's voice dropped to a whisper more dangerous than any shout. A blade wrapped in silk. Astray? Yes, my king. Eldric's lie came through a clenched jaw. Kaelan said, brutal, final, without granting the golden-haired girl so much as a glance. Genevieve's mouth fell open. Her face flooded a dark, hideous purple as muffled laughter rippled through the Ironfang ranks. Kaelan extended one hand and placed a single finger beneath Rowena's chin. He tilted her face upward, slowly, deliberately, so every soul in that hall could see her. Gasps tore through the older members of the Silverpine pack. The elders, those who had stood witness when Beatrice labored and screamed and brought life into the world, stared now in naked horror. __quote _43 __. Kaelan's voice swelled into a thunderclap, an authority that crushed all resistance beneath its weight. Look at the violet eyes of the true Silverpine bloodline. The eyes of your dead mate, Beatrice! The hall broke into murmurs. It cannot be, one ancient elder breathed, knuckles white around his cane. The firstborn died. She was burned. You burned an empty box, old man. Kylan's snarl swept the room like a blade before locking back onto the trembling Ifa. Alderic's fists crashed against the table. She is cursed. She brings rot and ruin. To claim her is to drag death into your own house. To claim her. Kylan's roar split the air, his silver eyes blazing so fiercely they threw light across the stone around him. Quote 51. Every voice in the hall died. Rowena lifted her gaze to him, her breath locked in her chest at the raw, undisguised devotion scorching across his monstrously beautiful face. Quote 52 __. The words struck the stone floor like hammer blows. Chaos shattered the silence. A scentless mate. It defied biology itself. The mate bond was forged in the primal pulse of pheromones, in spiritual scent woven soul deep. Yet the conviction pouring off the Alpha King was absolute. His wolf had bound itself, violently, irrevocably, to the fragile creature at his side. Elderic's sneer was etched with something suicidal, the glint of a man watching his own destruction arrive. You came for an alliance. Take the cursed one, and you take her as an enemy of Blackwood. We will never bow to a king who bets a demon. Kaelan laughed, low, dark, rumbling. It was the most terrifying sound Rowena had ever heard. Elderic, you misunderstand why I am here. I did not come to request your loyalty. I came to inform you that your lands already belong to me. He turned to Cedric. Disarm the Silver Pine guards. Any man who resists dies where he stands. Confine Elderic to the dungeons of his own keep. Let him learn what darkness tastes like. You cannot do this, Elderic screamed, hand clawing for the sword at his hip. He never cleared the scabbard. Cedric exploded over the high table with impossible speed and drove the hilt of his blade into Elderic's temple. The Alpha of Blackwood collapsed, a puppet whose strings had been slashed. Genevieve shrieked, stumbling backward in blind terror. The Silver Pine guards watched their Alpha crumple. They looked at the immovable wall of the Iron Fang army. Weapons clattered to the stone, one after another after another. The sound was a funeral dirge for the Blackwood dynasty. Kaelan looked down at Rowena. Her violet eyes were enormous, drowning in shock beyond language. In 5 minutes, this warlord had broken her father, swallowed her pack whole, and set fire to every wall that had caged her for 19 years. __quote _58 __. His voice shed every trace of violence the instant he spoke to her, soft as breath. He unclasped the heavy cloak from his shoulders, fur-lined, velvet dark, and swept it around her trembling frame. His warmth swallowed her. Pine and leather flooded her senses. __quote _59 __. They rode through the night. The towering, suffocating shadows of Blackwood Keep shrank behind them until they were nothing at all. Kaelan wouldn't stay one more hour in the fortress that had served as his mate's grave. The Iron Fang vanguard pushed hard through snow-choked pine forests, their massive direwolves carving a trail south toward the valleys. Rowena rode inside Kaelan's personal carriage, a heavily armored thing, lavish inside, draped in thick bear pelts and heated by a small iron stove. She wore an oversized tunic he'd given her. Her feet, finally, were wrapped in warm, fur-lined boots. She pressed her face toward the small glass window, watching moonlight spill across the forest canopy. The sheer size of the world left her drunk. Every tree, every shadow, every star, a miracle. 19 years she had spent reading about this world. Now it was rushing past her. Kaelan sat opposite, his enormous frame swallowing most of the space. He watched her with a quiet, burning reverence. His inner wolf, usually a restless, savage thing that howled for blood and territory, lay completely still. It curled inside his mind like a tamed hound, purring, content, simply because she breathed the same air. __quote _60 __. Kaelan said at last, his deep voice slicing through the grind of carriage wheels. Rowena flinched, pulling her gaze from the window. She looked at him, still unable to grasp that this terrifying king, a man who had broken kingdoms and shattered her father with a single word, was staring at her like she was made of spun glass. __quote _61 Rowena answered softly. Her voice was still rough, but it carried a fragile, musical quality beneath the damage. Quote 62. Quote 63, he corrected, gentle as a blade sheathed. Quote 64. Quote. Rowena drew the fur cloak tighter around her small frame. Her voice dropped. Kaelan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He reached out, his large, rough hand closing gently around both of hers. He paused. 2 days passed before the vanguard reached High Cross Keep, a towering, unbreachable fortress that marked the edge of Ironfang territory. It was here that Kaelan summoned Agatha. She was the oldest living member of the Ironfang pack, blind seer, chief healer, a woman whose knowledge of werewolf biology and ancient magic exceeded anything written in any book. She was frail and hunched, her eyes a flat milky white, her weight leaning hard on a carved yew staff. When she was led into the king's private chambers, where Rowena sat anxiously beside a roaring hearth, the old woman froze at the threshold. "Leave us, Cedric," Agatha commanded the beta who had brought her. Her voice scraped like dry leaves dragged across stone. Cedric bowed and withdrew, leaving only Kaelan, Rowena, and the blind healer. Agatha did not approach Rowena right away. She stood near the door, nostrils flaring, her head tilting slowly from side to side, as though she were listening to a frequency neither Kaelan nor Rowena could detect. "Extraordinary," Agatha breathed. Her milky eyes went wide with shock. She shuffled forward and dropped to her knees before Rowena's chair. Kaelan tensed, stepping closer. Agatha let out a sharp, dry laugh. The old woman lifted her trembling, wrinkled hands, holding them inches from Rowena's face, tracing an aura she could feel but never see. "She is not scentless, King Kaelan. She does not smell of nothing." "I smell nothing," Kaelan said, frowning hard, "and I possess the sharpest senses in the realm." "Because your senses are tuned to the earth, to blood, to violence and passion," Agatha replied, her voice shaking with awe. "You are an alpha. You smell the mundane world." Her hands hovered near Rowena's skin. __quote _78 __. Rowena's gaze shifted from Kaelan to the old woman, bewilderment plain on her face. "The ether? What does that mean?" "It means, precious girl, that you are a null," Agatha exhaled, her hands falling limp to her lap. "A myth I believed perished 500 years ago in the first purge. You see, in ancient times, the mightiest alpha kings were driven to madness, crushed beneath the weight of rival pack scents and the savage burden of their own dominance. Their lunas were hunted relentlessly, targeted for the power their scent radiated. But nature was cunning, my king. To shield the purest, most essential lunas, and to anchor the most volatile alphas, nature forged the null. Her scent is flawlessly, perfectly invisible. It hums on a spiritual frequency that dissolves aggression, panic, and madness. She is the living shield. Kaelin's eyes locked on Rowena. Every fractured piece snapped into place. The garden. He remembered it now with brutal clarity. His wolf had been raging, feral and restless from the feast. But the instant his skin touched hers, the instant their eyes met, a deep, unbreakable stillness had flooded through him. She hadn't merely triggered the mate bond. She had extinguished the inferno in his veins. Elderic. The name left Kaelin's throat as a growl, bitter as cinder on his tongue. He thought she was a curse. Agatha spat the words with naked contempt. Her weathered hand found Rowena's knee and squeezed. You, my queen, are the greatest gift the Ironfang court could ever receive. With an ether Luna beside him, the king's mind will never splinter beneath the crushing weight of his crown. You are not a broken wolf. You are the next step in our bloodline's evolution. Rowena couldn't move. For 19 years, she had been called a mistake, a monster, a rotting limb on a noble house's ancient tree. She had accepted, down in her marrow, that she deserved neither love, nor sunlight, nor the breath in her own lungs. Now she sat in a warm room, wrapped in the heavy furs of an alpha king, and a blind seer was calling her a legend. The tears came fast, scalding, unstoppable. The dam she had mortared around her heart for 2 decades cracked, then collapsed entirely. Her hands flew to her face, and a ragged, broken sob ripped from her chest. Kaelan dropped to his knees before her in a single heartbeat. He pried her hands away and gathered her against his broad chest. No words. He simply held her while 19 years of grief, loneliness and shame poured out against his armor. His face pressed into her silver-blonde hair. He inhaled deeply. There was no honeysuckle, no pine, no rain. But Agatha had spoken true. He smelled peace, absolute, immovable peace. You are safe, Kaelan murmured against her hair, his arms tightening like iron bands. You are my queen. And when we reach the capital, the entire world will kneel before the woman they tried to destroy. The march south toward the Ironfang capital of Ethelgard consumed a full fortnight. And during those 14 days, the world Rowena had only glimpsed through dusty, crumbling parchments opened wide before her. The jagged, frozen pine forests of the north surrendered to rolling green valleys, thundering rivers, and vast stone villages that dipped their heads beneath the black and silver banners of King Kaelan. With each passing day, the terrified, barefoot girl who had cowered in Blackwood Keep's shadows grew fainter. Under Kaelan's fierce devotion, Rowena transformed. He dressed her in gowns of deep violet and midnight black velvet, colors that set her pale hair and striking eyes ablaze. But the gowns were not what mattered most. He listened to her. When Kaelan convened war councils with his generals along the road, he demanded Rowena sit at his side beside the heavy oak chair. At first, the Ironfang commanders bristled at the silent, scentless woman. Their doubt did not survive long. 19 years locked away in Blackwood Keep had fed Rowena a voracious education. Oakhaven's history, its terrain, its forgotten treaties. Her strategic mind cut like a freshly whetted blade. Yet the shadows trailing behind her were not so easily shed. On the 12th night of the journey, as the vanguard made camp among the crumbling ruins of an ancient amphitheater, an Ironfang scout tore into the encampment at a dead gallop. His direwolf heaved beneath him, grey fur slick with sweat and crusted in dried blood. Kaelan surged from his command tent, his arm coiled around Rowena on instinct, pulling her behind him. He ordered, and his voice struck the stone ruins like rolling thunder. The scout choked out, half falling from his horse before his knee struck the dirt. __quote _89 __. A guttural growl rolled through the Iron Fang camp like distant thunder. Rowena knew that name in her bones. Antoine Chastel was no legend whispered around fires. He was documented horror. His private journals, his recorded butchery of lycanthropes across the 18th century French province of Gévaudan, all of it infamous. The Chastel bloodline had endured for centuries as a merciless guild of rogue hunters and exile wolves. Dark alchemy, poisoned steel. They were the buried nightmare that kept werewolf nobility awake at night. Genevieve had offered them the Blackwood armories and a place at her table in exchange for reclaiming the north. The scout pressed on, voice cracking under strain. __quote _90 __. Kaelin's eyes ignited, blinding, killing red. The air pressure in the camp collapsed beneath the weight of his fury. She dares bargain with butchers? She means to sell my mate? Kaelin. Rowena's voice came soft. Her small, warm palm settled over his white-knuckled fist. The effect was instant, alchemical. That choking, predatory aura pouring off the king dissolved, swallowed whole by her ether nature. Soldiers who had been baring their throats in raw submission to his rage suddenly pulled full, steadying breaths into their lungs. Rowena observed. Her voice carried an eerie calm, a kind of lethal serenity that made battle-scarred veterans stare. Kaelin looked down at her. Every soldier present could see it, absolute, undivided trust. Rowena said, violet eyes tracing the ancient maps spread across a nearby table. Ruthless. Brilliant. Kaelin smiled, a slow, dark baring of fangs that promised absolute annihilation. The next dawn unfolded exactly as Rowena had predicted. Kaelin rode into the narrow, fog-strangled Whispering Gorge with only 20 men. The cliffs above erupted. Grappling hooks and weighted nets came crashing down. Crossbow bolts tipped with liquid silver screamed through the mist. Genevieve stood at the cliff's edge, cloaked Chastel mercenaries flanking her on both sides. "Kill the beast!" she shrieked, face contorted into something ugly. Jealousy and hatred stripped bare. "Take back my crown!" But the Iron Fang decoy force held. Heavy iron shields rose in unison. Before Genevieve could command a second volley, the eastern ridge detonated with the synchronized, bone-shaking roars of 200 Iron Fang warriors. Cedric surged down the slope at their head, a tidal wave of fur and sharpened steel. The ambush collapsed into a slaughter. The Chastel mercenaries, caught utterly blind by a flanking assault of that magnitude, were shredded. Through the chaos, Genevieve scrambled down the rocky face, clawing her way toward escape. Her eyes found Kaelin. He had dismounted. He was walking toward her. Slow, unhurried, inevitable. The stride of a death god. Genevieve's hand shot into her cloak. She ripped free a glass vial, Chastel made, packed with concentrated wolfsbane and silver vapor, and hurled it straight at his chest. Glass shattered against his armor. Toxic green fog erupted around the Alpha King. Kaelin roared. His knee hit the ground as the dark alchemy scorched through his lungs and blistered his skin, strangling his inner wolf into paralysis. Genevieve drew a dagger. She lunged for the crippled king, but she never reached him. A shape materialized from the thinning fog, planted directly between the fallen king and the frenzied princess. Rowena. She had refused the safety of camp, riding hidden among the decoy force. Genevieve shrieked, slashing the dagger at Rowena's face. Rowena did not flinch, did not retreat. 19 years she had endured this woman's vanity, her father's cruelty. Her hand shot out with impossible speed, locking around Genevieve's wrist, a grip that betrayed strength no one believed she possessed. __quote _101 ___. The whisper came low, steady. Her violet eyes blazed with ethereal, blinding light. Ether energy erupted from her core. A shockwave of crystalline air pulsed outward in every direction. It struck the lingering wolfsbane cloud and annihilated it, transforming the lethal green vapor into harmless morning dew. Genevieve gasped and wrenched backward, but Rowena's grip held like iron. "You are nothing but a frightened child playing with monsters, Genevieve, and I am finished being afraid." One swift, precise motion, learned from watching Kailan's soldiers drill, and Rowena wrenched the wrist sideways. The dagger clattered to the ground. A sharp strike to the temple. Genevieve crumpled into the dirt. Still. Rowena was already on her knees beside Kailan. Black blood bubbled from his lips. His skin had gone chalk white. She pressed both palms flat against his chest, directly over his heart, and unleashed her ether nature into his system. Not magic, biology. Her presence burned the panic and toxicity from his cells, forcing his alpha healing factor into violent acceleration. Seconds passed. Kailan sucked in a massive, shuddering breath. The silver burns scoring his face began knitting shut. His icy grey eyes opened, found the woman who had just dragged him back from death. __quote _103 ___, he rasped. He pulled her down into a fierce, desperate kiss surrounded by the carnage of the gorge. High on the cliffs above, Cedric and the victorious Ironfang army looked down, swords hammered against shields, a deafening rhythmic salute to their king, and to the legendary Etheluna, who had just proved her absolute supremacy. Ethelberg was a masterpiece of medieval architecture, a sprawling metropolis carved into the flank of a massive dormant volcano. Walls of black iron and obsidian, towering spires that pierced the clouds. When King Kailan and Rowena rode through the great iron gates, the city did not cheer. It roared. News of the Etherluna's tactical brilliance at Whispering Gorge and her miraculous healing of the king had arrived before them. Tens of thousands of wolves lined the streets, hurling crushed pine needles and white winter roses across the cobblestones. Rowena sat tall upon a magnificent white direwolf, riding at Kailan's side. No longer a barefoot ghost in a threadbare wool shift, she wore midnight blue riding garb, intricate silver armor clasping her shoulders, a heavy cloak of white direwolf fur sweeping behind her. Those violet eyes, once brimming with terror, now surveyed her people with deep empathy and unyielding strength. Their first act was justice. Beneath the grand throne room's massive chandelier of wrought iron and glowing crystals, Genevieve was dragged before the royal dais in heavy iron chains. Blackwood's golden girl, caked in filth. Spirit shattered, ambition ground to ash. Kailan occupied the obsidian throne, his presence suffocating and absolute. The voice boomed without a trace of mercy. Genevieve collapsed to her knees, sobbing, pressing her forehead to the cold stone floor. She begged, her gaze lifting to Rowena. Rowena stared down at the woman who had lived draped in luxury while she rotted in a cell. No vengeance stirred in her chest, only a deep, profound pity. Death was too easy. Death ended the lesson. Rowena rose from her throne. Her voice rang through the silent hall, clear as struck crystal. Kailan watched her, entirely willing to execute whatever judgment she passed. Rowena's decree cut through the silence like a blade. You will be stripped of every pack tie. Agatha's alchemy will bind your wolf, and you will be cast beyond the eastern sea into human lands. Her voice did not waver. You will spend the rest of your days without a wolf's strength, without a pack's shelter, without a scent. She let the words settle like stones dropped into still water. You will know exactly what it means to be hollow. A collective gasp bled through the hall. For a proud werewolf, this was crueler than any executioner's sword, a perfectly poetic, bloodless ruin. Kaelin's chin dipped in slow approval, a dangerous smile ghosting across his mouth. He lifted 2 fingers. The guards seized Genevieve and hauled her away, her screams clawing at the cathedral walls. That evening, 1,000 silver braziers blazed inside the great temple of Ethelborg. The coronation had come. Rowena knelt before the high altar. Blind Agatha stood above her, draped in ceremonial robes, cradling a crown of woven silver branches set with a single massive amethyst, a stone that mirrored Rowena's eyes as though forged from them. Agatha's rough voice filled every corner of the vast stone cathedral. We believed the gods had left us to devour ourselves in our own fury. A pause. Her blind gaze lifted toward the vaulted ceiling, but from the darkest tower of the north, light has returned. The crown descended gently onto Rowena's silver-blonde hair. Agatha's proclamation rang off ancient stone. True mate to the Black Wolf, anchor of the Iron Fang court, unquestioned High Queen of Oakhaven. Rowena rose. She turned to face the congregation. Below her stood the greatest Alpha King history had ever known, and in his eyes burned an adoration so raw it bordered on worship. Behind him, thousands of the realm's most lethal warriors filled the temple floor, and as one body, they dropped to their knees. Every head bowed in absolute submission to their scentless, magnificent queen. She had spent 19 years caged in a tower, told she was nature's mistake. Tonight, she was the sky itself. The tale of the Ether Queen endures as proof of prejudice's devastating cost and destiny's relentless patience. Alpha Alderic's obsession with hiding what he called a biological flaw achieved the opposite of his intent. By locking Rowena away, he shielded the realm's most vital gift from the wars and political machinations that would have consumed her. King Kailan, a ruler carved by blood and conquest, found his absolute equal not in a warrior of savage lineage, but in a silent scholar who taught a feral kingdom that peace could be its own kind of strength. Rowena's passage from forgotten barefoot prisoner to revered High Queen of Oakhaven stands as living evidence that true power does not always roar. Sometimes it is the quiet, unbreakable stillness that holds the storm in place. They called her a curse. In the end, she became the very heartbeat of an empire.